The bell above the door had a particular sound. Margaret had never replaced it, not in 28 years. It was a small brass half-moon, slightly tarnished, with a ring that was neither sharp nor sweet but something between the two. The kind of sound that made people slow down when they came in, as if the shop itself was asking them to take a breath before they began. She was behind the front counter reorganizing the display of new arrivals when she heard it ring on that Tuesday morning in March. 2 sets of footsteps. She looked up. Her son walked in first. Daniel, 42, in a blazer that cost more than her monthly electricity bill, his phone already in his hand, his eyes already moving around the room the way they always moved around rooms, not looking at what was there, but calculating what could replace it. Behind him came a man she had never seen. Late 40s, broad, in the particular uniform of commercial real estate professionals the world over, a good watch, no tie, a leather-bound portfolio under his arm. "Mom," Daniel said, his smile arriving exactly a half-second too late to be real. "I hope you don't mind. I just wanted to show Marcus the space." Margaret did not move. She set down the book she was holding, a copy of Marilyn Robinson's Gilead, As It Happened, a book about fathers and sons and the weight of what we leave behind, and she looked at her son, and then at the man behind him, and she said nothing at all. "Beautiful bones," the man said, looking up at the ceiling. At her ceiling. "Original plasterwork?" 1934, Margaret said. The building was a telegraph office. He made a note in his portfolio without looking at her. Good bones. Good bones. She watched Daniel watch him. Her son's expression, eager, hopeful, the particular brightness of a man who believes he is about to get something, was not a new expression. She had seen it in various forms for 42 years. But it had never before been directed at her shop. If this story is already finding its way under your skin, hit that like button and subscribe to Sarah Mitchell and drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. She always said the ones who stay quiet longest know the most. Let's see if that's true. Margaret Rose Sinclair had opened the bookshop on a Thursday morning in 1996, when she was 43 years old. Her husband Thomas had stood beside her and watched her unlock the door for the first time with a key she had owned for 6 weeks and already worn smooth from carrying it in her palm. "Here we go," she had said. And he had said, "Here you go." He was already sick then, though neither of them used the word. The diagnosis had come 8 months before, and they had spent that whole autumn making decisions, the way you do when time stops being something you simply assume. The bookshop was her decision. Thomas had his own, he had gone back to church after 20 years away, had taken up chess, had planted a garden that neither of them fully believed he would see finished. He saw 2 summers of it. He died in the 3rd, before the dahlias came in. Margaret had run the shop alone ever since. That was 25 years of Septembers, of the smell of new paper in autumn, of children's reading hours on Saturday mornings and poetry readings on the first Thursday of every month. 25 years of learning the lives of her regulars, who wanted recommendations and who wanted to be left alone, who needed the quiet of a bookshop because their homes were too loud, who came in not for books at all but for the feeling of being somewhere that expected nothing urgent from them. She knew all of it. She knew it the way she knew the particular creak of the 3rd step on the left staircase, the way the afternoon light came through the south window and turned gold by 3 o'clock, the way the radiator in the back room knocked twice each morning before settling into its steady rhythm. It was not a hobby. It was not a charity. It was not, as Daniel had taken to calling it in the last 2 years, his voice dropping slightly as though embarrassed by the smallness of it, that little place. It was a building she owned outright, in a neighborhood that had changed so much around it that the building was now, if she chose to think about it in those terms, worth considerably more than most people would guess. She had always chosen not to think about it in those terms. The building had been Thomas's life insurance and her retirement savings combined, paid off quietly over 20 years while she reinvested everything the shop earned back into itself. She had never told Daniel about the final mortgage payment. She had not celebrated it publicly. She had simply sat in the back room one evening with a glass of wine and the ledger and run her finger down the column of numbers until she reached the bottom, and she had let herself feel what she had earned the right to feel. Daniel did not know the building was paid off. Daniel did not know a great many things. Her son was not a cruel man in the deliberate sense. He was something more complicated than that, and in some ways more difficult to contend with. He was a man who had grown up comfortable and concluded, without ever examining the conclusion, that comfort was his natural state. He had watched his mother work without ever quite understanding that what she was doing was work. The bookshop, from his earliest memory, had simply been there, a place that hummed along, that never failed, that his mother managed with the quiet competence she brought to everything. He had never watched it struggle because Margaret had never let him see it struggle. She had absorbed the difficult years alone, worked her way through them in the small hours of the morning, and said nothing about it at dinner. And so her son had grown into a man who believed her success was modest because her ambitions were modest, when in truth her ambitions had simply been realized in ways he had never thought to look for. He had failed at 3 businesses. The first was a franchise opportunity he had heard about at a golf weekend. The second was a logistics startup with 2 friends from university, which had lasted 19 months before the partners fell out over equity. The third was a fitness studio he had opened with his then-wife Priya, which had closed during the pandemic and left them both carrying debt that had contributed, in ways neither of them discussed directly, to the eventual end of their marriage. He was not broken by these failures. He was, Margaret had observed, the kind of man failure does not teach, because he had always found someone to cushion the landing. His father, once. Then his wife's family. Then Margaret herself, who had lent him money twice without making him feel small for asking, and who had never once said "I told you so" when the money was gone. She had learned something from those loans. Not that her son was incapable, he was not. She had learned that the money she gave him had not helped him. It had helped him avoid the lesson. And so when he had come to her 18 months ago with the new idea, the co-working space, the technology-enabled community hub, the pitch deck printed on heavy cardstock, she had listened to all of it, asked careful questions, and then said, quietly and clearly, no. He had not taken it well. The dinner had been at his apartment. Priya was there. They had, to everyone's slight surprise, remained close after the divorce, sharing a social world that excluded Margaret more comfortably than it included her. There was also a man named Garrett, who styled himself a strategic advisor, in the way that men in their 40s often do when they prefer not to name the more specific thing. And there was Lily. Lily was Daniel's daughter from his first marriage, 16 years old, with her grandmother's eyes and a quickness about her that Margaret had loved from the first hour of her life. Lily spent Saturday afternoons at the bookshop. She read in the armchair by the south window and occasionally, with Margaret's gentle guidance, helped a customer find something. She was the one person in Daniel's orbit who had thought to ask, on the bookshop's 25th anniversary, whether anyone was planning a celebration. No one had been planning a celebration. Daniel and Priya had, that same day, been at a networking brunch in the city. At the dinner, Garrett had spent the early part of the evening outlining the co-working concept for a market he described as underserved creative professionals. He had numbers. He spoke them with the confidence of someone who had learned that confidence is more persuasive than accuracy. Lily had been very quiet, eating her food and watching her grandmother. The thing is, Daniel said, when the pitch had run its course and the table had gone quiet in the way tables go quiet when something is expected from the person who has not yet spoken, the property is really the key. The right location changes everything. And I've been thinking, he looked at his mother. Mom. The shop. Margaret set down her fork. The shop. The neighborhood has changed completely. You've been there 28 years. The property alone, he glanced at Garrett. I mean, Marcus pulled some preliminary numbers. Mom, that building might be worth. I know what the building is worth, Margaret said. The table went quiet in a different way. Well. Daniel cleared his throat. Then you know that selling it now, before the development corridor is finalized, would set you up. I'm not selling the bookshop, Daniel. He had tried 3 more angles. Retirement planning. The physical demands of running a business at her age. The idea that the money could work harder invested than sitting in bricks and mortar. Each angle was framed carefully, reasonably, in the language of care. She noted the care. She noted, also, that it was not care for her. Garrett attempted a contribution. from a purely strategic standpoint. I appreciate your perspective, Margaret said, in a tone that made very clear she did not require it. She picked up her fork. Let's talk about something else. Lily, across the table, met her grandmother's eyes and said nothing. But something passed between them, the particular understanding that exists between two people who see the same room clearly when everyone else in it is pretending. In the weeks that followed, Daniel called more often than usual. The calls had a quality Margaret recognized. They were warm, attentive, full of questions about how she was feeling and whether she was sleeping well and whether she had thought about what they had discussed. The warmth was genuine enough. He was her son and he loved her, in his way, but it was also instrumental. He was managing her. She had managed classrooms for 30 years. She knew what managing looked like. She answered the questions honestly and changed the subject when she chose to, and did not let him hear the particular quality of her silence. Priya called once. This was unusual. They spoke rarely. On the call, Priya was warm in the practiced way that women who have studied warmth as a professional skill are warm. She said she had been thinking about Margaret's long-term situation. She said she had a friend who specialized in estate planning and transitions for small business owners. She used the word transition twice. I'm not transitioning, Margaret said. Of course not, Priya said, in a tone that implied otherwise. I just want you to know we're thinking about you. Margaret thanked her and hung up. The next morning, she called her solicitor, a woman named Patricia Okonkwo, who had handled the building's title transfer when Thomas died and who had been Margaret's advisor in matters of this kind for 17 years. They had a conversation that lasted 45 minutes. When it was over, Margaret made a cup of tea and stood at the front window of the shop and watched the street for a little while. Then she went back to work. The shop had a rhythm she loved for the same reason she had always loved classrooms, not because the days were easy, but because they were purposeful. She opened at 9, when the light was still new. The regulars came in their order, first the early walkers who wanted somewhere warm to browse, then the mothers with small children who needed somewhere patient, then the lunch hour crowd, quick and purposeful, then the slower afternoons of readers who had nowhere else to be and no apologies for it. She knew their names. She knew what they were reading and what they had abandoned halfway through and what they were afraid to start. She knew that Mrs. Abernathy read Victorian fiction when her arthritis was bad and crime novels when she was feeling well. She knew the young man who came in every Thursday was working up the courage to read his late mother's copy of a book she had pressed into his hands the last time he saw her. She had been patient with him about it for 3 years. She would be patient for 3 more if necessary. She knew that the bookshop was not a business in the way Daniel meant when he used the word. But it was also not a charity. It was a living thing that had made itself necessary to the people who came through its door, and in being necessary to them, it had made itself, year by year and quietly, quite secure. She had not mentioned to Daniel that she had been approached, 14 months ago, by a man representing a small chain of lifestyle retailers who wanted to convert the building into a boutique concept store. She had been approached the year before that by a restaurant group. And 6 months ago, there had been a letter from a heritage development consortium offering to list the building as a cultural asset, in a proposed arts district framework. She had read all of the letters carefully and placed them in a file in the back office. She had responded to none of them. Then, 3 weeks ago, a different kind of letter had arrived. Not from a developer. From something called the Meridian Literary Foundation. The letter was written on cream paper in good type, addressed to Margaret Sinclair, not to the owner, or the proprietor, but to her, by name. It explained that the Meridian Foundation had been established by a private bequest for the purpose of identifying and supporting independent bookshops of particular cultural and community significance. It said that the shop, Sinclair and Sons, as it had been called since Thomas had suggested, laughing, that the and Sons part was aspirational and had better become true, had been identified through a process of community nomination and curatorial review. It said that a representative of the foundation would be in the area in the coming weeks and would be grateful for the opportunity to visit. Margaret had read the letter 3 times. Then she had placed it in the file with the others. She had not told Daniel. She had not told Lily, though she had thought about it. She had not told anyone. She was, by temperament and by long training, a woman who waited until she understood something fully before she spoke about it. She was waiting. The developer Marcus had come back once without Daniel. He had stood on the pavement outside the shop and looked at the building from across the street as if performing calculations in his head. Margaret watched him from behind the display window. He had a notebook. She went to the door and opened it. "Are you coming in?" she called. He startled. "Mrs. Sinclair. I was just—" "You were assessing my building from the pavement," she said. "That's fine. But if you have questions, I'd rather you ask them inside." He came in. He was apologetic, which she thought was the right response to being caught. He said he was sorry for the Tuesday visit, that he should have introduced himself properly, that Daniel had given him the impression the situation was more, he paused, looking for a word, more settled than it appeared. "My son," Margaret said, "has a habit of getting ahead of himself." The man nodded. He asked a few careful questions. She answered them honestly. At the end he said, "It's a remarkable property. You'd achieve a remarkable price." "I know," she said. "Would you like a book recommendation?" He blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "For the train. You have a long trip back to the city. I can find you something." He bought a paperback, a novel she selected without asking him what he liked, because she could tell from the way he talked about things. She was rarely wrong about this. At the door he turned. "Is there anything that would change your mind?" She looked at him for a moment. "No," she said. "But thank you for asking directly. I prefer it." After he left, Lily appeared from behind the poetry shelves, where she had been shelving returns for the last hour. She did this on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, in exchange for a modest hourly rate and the right to read anything in the shop without buying it first. "Who was that?" Lily asked. "A man your father sent," Margaret said. Lily looked at the door, then back at her grandmother. "Dad's not going to give up," she said. It was not a prediction. It was the quiet statement of something she had already observed and already understood. "No," Margaret agreed. "He isn't." "What are you going to do?" Margaret looked at this girl, 16 years old, Thomas's eyes, her own stubbornness, an instinctive fairness that neither of her parents had quite managed to teach her but that she had somehow arrived at on her own, and she thought about the letter on cream paper sitting now in the top drawer of her desk, moved up from the file because she had been reading it more frequently. "I'm going to wait," she said. "And then I'm going to let things unfold the way they are going to unfold." Lily considered this. "That's very calm." "I've had a great deal of practice," Margaret said. She went to make them both a cup of tea. The afternoon light was coming through the south window, turning gold the way it always did at 3 o'clock, falling across the spines of 1,000 books that no one was going to sell, in a building that no one was going to take. Not today. Not ever, if Margaret had anything to say about it. And Margaret, as it turned out, had quite a lot to say, though the moment to say it had not yet come. She was still watching. Still noting. Still keeping everything exactly where she needed it to be. The stranger had not arrived yet. But she was coming. And the day she walked through that door was going to change everything Daniel thought he knew about his mother, her shop, and exactly what the word worthless means when it belongs to the wrong person. The stranger arrived on a Wednesday morning, which was Margaret's favorite day of the week, quiet enough to breathe, busy enough to feel purposeful. The March light was thin but honest, the kind that doesn't flatter anything but shows everything clearly. Margaret was in the back room going through an estate collection she had purchased the previous Friday. A retired professor had died and left behind 3,000 books, and his daughter, a pediatric nurse from Bristol who had driven 6 hours to clear the house, had stood in the doorway of her father's study and looked at the walls and said, simply, "Someone who loves books should have them." Margaret had arranged a fair price and hired 2 university students to transport the boxes. She was going through them now, volume by volume, the way she always went through acquisitions, slowly, because you never knew what you would find tucked inside a book that had lived a full life in someone else's hands. She had already found 3 pressed flowers, a letter in German she couldn't read, a photograph of a man and a woman standing in front of a mountain neither of them would ever be young enough to climb again, and a handwritten note that said only, "Don't forget the library closes at 4 on Thursdays." She kept all of it. She had a tin in the back office for these things, evidence of the interior lives of previous readers, the sediment of other people's days. Thomas had found it charming. Daniel had once called it, with a laugh that was not quite kind, her museum of junk. She heard the bell above the front door and came out from the back room, still holding a copy of the Brothers Karamazov with someone's margin notes running all the way to the edge of every page. The woman standing just inside the door was perhaps 55, with the kind of stillness that belongs to people who have spent a great deal of time in rooms that require it, libraries, courtrooms, hospitals, places where composure is structural. She was wearing a grey wool coat and carrying a canvas bag printed with the name of a bookshop in Edinburgh. She was looking at the room. Not assessing it. Reading it. The way someone reads a room when they love rooms and can't help but find meaning in the way a space has arranged itself. "Good morning," Margaret said. The woman turned. She had grey-streaked hair cut short and direct, and eyes that reminded Margaret immediately, with a sensation she couldn't quite name, like recognizing something before you understand what it is, of the letter on cream paper. "Good morning," the woman said. "I'm Constance Hale. I wrote to you." Margaret made tea. She always made tea when something important was about to happen, because she had learned from a long life of important things happening that tea gave both parties permission to be unhurried. It said, "There is time. We are not in a rush. What matters will still matter after the kettle has boiled." Constance Hale sat in the chair beside the back office desk, not the customer chair, which was near the front, but the chair that was Margaret's own chair when she was not behind the counter, the one she had had reupholstered twice because it had been Thomas's and she was not willing to give it up just because the fabric wore out. The symbolism was not lost on her. She was inviting this woman into the more private part of the shop, the part that customers did not usually see. She had not made a conscious decision to do this. She had simply done it. "I should explain the foundation properly," Constance said, when the tea was poured and the biscuits were on the table between them. "And I should be honest with you about why I'm here, because I think you're someone who values directness." "I do," Margaret said. The Meridian Literary Foundation was established 7 years ago by a bequest from a woman named Eleanor Marsh. Perhaps you've heard of her. Margaret considered. The publisher? Marsh and Holloway? Her mother. The original Marsh. She built the company from a small independent imprint in the 1960s. When she died, she left the majority of her estate in trust for the support of what her will described as the places where books are loved by the people who give their lives to them. She was 79 when she wrote it. She knew what she was talking about. Margaret looked at her hands around the teacup. "How did you find the shop?" "Community nominations, as I said in the letter." "But I should tell you which community." Constance opened her canvas bag and produced a folder, which she set on the table without opening it. "In the last 18 months, your shop has been nominated by a local primary school that runs a literacy program here on Saturday mornings. By the clinical director of the regional hospice, who tells me that 7 of her staff members describe this shop as a place that sustains them during difficult work. By a community mental health organization whose clients you have, apparently, welcomed for years without ever making them feel like charity cases. And by 47 individual letters from what I can only describe as people who consider this shop to be, and this phrase appears in more than one letter, essential." The room was very quiet. Somewhere in the front of the shop, a customer had come in through the bell, one of the regulars. By the sound of the footsteps, she knew the rhythms by now, and was making their quiet way to the fiction section. "I wasn't aware of the nominations," Margaret said. "People rarely are," Constance said. "That's rather the point. The shops we look for are not the ones that advocate for themselves." Margaret thought about Daniel and his pitch deck with its market analysis and its projected returns on investment. She thought about the man Marcus and his notebook on the pavement. She thought about Priya's friend who specialized in transitions. "What does the foundation offer?" she said. "Practically." Constance opened the folder. Several things. A significant endowment, the specific figure is in the documentation, and I would encourage you to review it with a financial advisor you trust before responding. But I will tell you now that it is substantial enough to address any capital concerns about the building's upkeep for the foreseeable future. A preservation designation, which means that the building cannot be developed or rezoned under current heritage protection frameworks without a legal process that takes years and that you would almost certainly win. And a program of fellowship residencies, authors, poets, scholars, who come to the shop for periods of a week to a month, which brings attention and visitors of a particular kind. Margaret was quiet for a moment. She thought about the filing cabinet in the corner of the back office, where the letters from developers sat in their separate folder. She thought about the letter from the Heritage Development Consortium. She thought about what the building might be worth on the open market, which she knew precisely, and what it was worth to her, which could not be expressed in any currency she had been offered. "Tell me," she said. "What happens if I sell?" Constance looked at her steadily. "The foundation cannot follow a building. We fund places that remain places. If the shop closes, for any reason, the relationship ends. And what happens to the endowment at that point? It returns to the general fund and is redistributed to other nominees." Margaret nodded slowly. She looked at the documentation in the folder. The number was there, clearly stated, on the first page. She did not allow her expression to change, though it required a particular internal effort. She had been careful with money her entire life. She recognized, without drama, that the number on the page represented a form of security she had spent 28 years building toward through other means. "I need to think about it," she said. "And speak with my solicitor." "Of course," Constance said. "I would expect nothing else." They finished their tea. Constance asked if she might browse the shop, and Margaret said of course, and watched this woman move through the aisles with the particular unhurried reverence of someone for whom a bookshop is not a novelty but a native habitat. She bought 4 books. She paid full price without being reminded that there was a discount for multiple purchases, though there was. At the door she paused. "Mrs. Sinclair. You said you need to think about it. May I ask, is there anything making you uncertain?" Margaret considered the question. Through the front window she could see the street outside, which was, in the way of streets in neighborhoods that have changed, a document of several different eras of itself: the old post office now a cafe, the ironmonger now a yoga studio, the terraced houses with their small gardens mostly converted now to shareholder flats. And in the middle of all of it, unchanged, the frontage of Sinclair and Sons with its hand-painted sign and its window display that Margaret changed every 2 weeks herself. "No," she said. "There is nothing making me uncertain. I already know what I am going to do. I am simply giving it the time it deserves." Constance smiled, a real one, without calculation, the kind that belongs to people who have learned to recognize their own kind when they find them. "I'll be in touch," she said. The bell rang as she left. The sound of it, small, brass, slightly tarnished, imperfect, echoed for a moment in the quiet of the morning. Margaret did not call Daniel that day. She called Patricia Okonkwo, who read the documentation carefully over the telephone while Margaret waited, and then said, in a voice that was professional but not without feeling, "Margaret, I want to be very sure you understand what this number represents." "I understand it," Margaret said. "The preservation designation alone." "I understand that too." A pause. "Does Daniel know?" "Not yet." Another pause. "When do you intend to tell him?" Margaret looked out the back window of the office, where the small courtyard she maintained, a few pots of herbs, a bench, a wisteria that was older than the business itself, was just beginning to show the first green ambitions of spring. "When the time is right," she said. "I'll know when." Patricia, who had been her solicitor for 17 years and had heard this answer before in various forms, said only, "Shall I prepare the acceptance documents for your review?" "Please," Margaret said. "And Patricia, I want something added. A clause. If I choose to extend the arrangement beyond the initial period, I want the building to be formally registered as a community asset. In perpetuity." A brief silence. That would make it very difficult for anyone to acquire the property. Yes, Margaret said. It would. Daniel called that evening. He called at 7, when Margaret was eating dinner alone at the kitchen table with a book propped against the fruit bowl, as she had done almost every evening for 25 years. She let it ring twice before answering. Mom. How are you? The warmth, careful and genuine in equal measure. Well, thank you. And you? Good, good. I wanted to say, I know Marcus dropped by the shop again without me. He mentioned you were pretty definitive. I was, Margaret said. I need you to know, Mom, the opportunity isn't going to wait. The development corridor approval is going through by summer. After that the property values in that whole stretch will move again, and if you wanted to act it would need to be now. He paused. I've spoken to Priya. Between us, we think we could put together a really strong case to the bank if we could show the property as an asset. You'd be taken care of, obviously. That's the whole point. Margaret thought about the number on the first page of the foundation's documentation. She thought about the preservation designation. She thought about the clause she had asked Patricia to add. Daniel, she said. Can I ask you something? Of course. When you come into the shop, when was the last time you actually came in and browsed? A beat. What do you mean? I mean, when did you last walk in the door and look at the books? Choose something. Read the back cover and feel whether it was for you? He made a sound that was half laugh, half discomfort. Mom, I'm a busy person. You know I love what you've built. What have I built, do you think? The question landed in a way he hadn't expected. She heard him shifting. I mean, the shop. Obviously. It's a lovely shop. It is, she agreed. Good night, Daniel. Sleep well. She hung up. She returned to her book. The chapter she had been reading was about a house that had been in a family for 4 generations, and the daughter who was the only one who understood that its value had nothing to do with what it would fetch on the market. She finished her dinner. She washed her plate. She went to bed at 10, as she always did, and she read for another hour, and she slept well. The following Saturday, Lily came in at noon. She did this most Saturdays, arriving in her particular way, which was to come in quietly and survey the shop for a moment before saying hello, as though she was taking the temperature of the room. She had done this since she was small. Thomas had noticed it when she was 4 years old and had said, quietly, to Margaret, that one sees things. Today she was carrying a container of homemade biscuits from her mother's kitchen, which she placed on the counter without comment. She went to the shelves and began in her usual spot, the poetry section, because she was working her way through it systematically, a self-imposed curriculum she had told no one about, which Margaret knew about because she had been watching the shelves carefully. At 2 o'clock, during a quiet spell, Lily came to the counter. Dad called me, she said. What did he say? He wanted to know if you'd said anything to me. About the shop. She looked at her grandmother levelly. He thinks you're being sentimental and not thinking practically. He may be right that I'm being sentimental, Margaret said. He is certainly wrong that I'm not being practical. Lily considered this. Is something happening? Several things are happening, Margaret said. None of which require immediate discussion. But they're good things? Margaret looked at her granddaughter. 16 years old, Thomas's eyes, the particular inheritance of clear sight that sometimes skips a generation. The girl who had asked, on the shop's 25th anniversary, whether anyone was planning a celebration. Yes, she said. They are very good things. Lily nodded, as though this confirmed something she had already suspected. She went back to the poetry section. At 3 o'clock, when the light came through the south window and turned gold the way it always did, she came back to the counter with a Seamus Heaney collection and a question about what liminal meant. Margaret told her. She shelved returns for another hour, and then she put on her coat and said, "Goodbye," and Margaret watched her go through the glass door, the bell ringing in her wake. Daniel came in person the following Tuesday. He came alone this time, without Marcus, without Priya, without the strategic advisor. He came at 11, when the shop was quiet. He was wearing a jacket she recognized, the same one from 3 weeks ago, which meant he had dressed for this conversation as for a meeting, as he always did when he wanted to project authority. She was restocking the history section when he came in. "Mom." He came to stand near her, not behind her, close enough for the conversation to be private but visible from the counter, which she noticed because she noticed most things. "Can we talk?" "Of course," she said. She kept shelving. "I want you to hear me out. I know I've pushed too hard. I know I came in here with Marcus without warning, and that was wrong. I'm sorry for that." She looked at him. The apology was genuine. She accepted it as such. "What I'm trying to say is, I need this, Mom. Not in the way I've been presenting it. Not as a business deal. I need it the way the family needed you to step up every other time." He met her eyes. "I'm not in a good place. The fitness studio debt is still there. I'm carrying more than I've let on, and I thought, if the property could be unlocked." "How much?" she said. He blinked. "Sorry? How much are you carrying?" He told her. The number was significant. Not catastrophic, he had not, as she had quietly feared, buried himself entirely, but significant. She registered it without expression. "Sit down," she said. She put down the books she was holding. She led him to the reading corner at the back of the shop, the 2 armchairs by the window where on good afternoons she sat with regulars and talked about what they were reading. She sat in one chair. He sat in the other. "I'm going to tell you some things," she said. "And I want you to listen completely before you respond. Can you do that?" He nodded. He had his mother's eyes, she thought, or rather, she had always thought, he had the shape of Thomas's eyes without quite the quality of them. But right now, looking at him without the pitch deck and the developer and the framing of his requests, she saw something she had not seen in a long time. She saw the boy who had sat in this same chair, years ago, reading The Hobbit for the first time, not yet old enough to know that adulthood was going to be harder than he had imagined. "The building is not going to be sold," she said. "Not now. Not later. Not under any circumstances that I can currently foresee." He opened his mouth. She held up her hand. "Let me finish. 2 weeks ago I was approached by a foundation, a literary foundation established by a significant private bequest, that has offered the shop an endowment and a preservation designation of a kind that will protect this building for as long as the shop continues to operate. The endowment is substantial. Patricia has reviewed the documentation. I am going to accept." She watched his face move through several expressions in quick succession, confusion, then comprehension, then something that she read as a complicated mixture of loss and something not quite relief but adjacent to it. "The endowment," he said, "is sufficient," she said, "to address the building's long-term costs entirely, and to leave me in a position more secure than I would be after selling. More secure, and considerably freer." He was quiet for a long moment. "Mom," he said finally. "Why didn't you tell me?" It was the right question. She had wondered when he would find it. "Because," she said, "I needed to know something first. I needed to know who was going to advocate for the shop and who was going to advocate for what the shop could become on the open market. I needed to see it clearly. And I have seen it." He sat with this. She let him. "I'm not punishing you," she said. "I want you to understand that. I am going to help you with the debt, in a form and on terms we will discuss separately, that have conditions attached, because I have learned something about money and learning." She paused. "But the shop is not the mechanism. The shop was never the mechanism. The shop is the place where your grandfather and I made something that lasts. And it will last." Daniel looked at the room around him, the shelves, the light, the gold afternoon coming through the south window, the particular smell of paper and warmth that Margaret had spent 28 years building into the walls. "I never really looked at it," he said. It was almost to himself. Almost an accident. No, she agreed. But it's not too late to start. That evening, after the shop was closed and the lights were low and the street outside had settled into its evening rhythm, Margaret sat in the back room with the foundation documents and a pen. She did not sign them yet. She had learned, over a long life of important moments, that the last step before a threshold deserves a moment of its own, not from uncertainty but from respect. You pause at the door before you open it. You hold the thing before you commit it. You let it be fully real. She thought about Thomas, who had stood beside her when she opened this door for the first time and said, "Here you go." She thought about Lily, who had asked whether anyone was planning a celebration. She thought about Constance Hale, who had walked through the door on a Wednesday morning and read the room the way someone reads a room when they love rooms. She thought about all of it. And then she picked up the pen. Outside, the street was quiet. The last light of the day was going from the sky. Somewhere in the distance, a bicycle bell rang, thin and clear, the sound of someone heading somewhere, not hurrying, not afraid. Margaret set the pen to paper. The shop would still be here tomorrow. So would she. If this story has found you, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story from Sarah Mitchell. The best ones are still coming, and the people who watch to the end are exactly the ones who need to hear them. The acceptance letter went to Constance Hale on a Thursday morning, the same day of the week Margaret had opened the shop for the first time, 28 years ago. She did not think this was coincidence. She thought it was the particular way that meaningful things tend to arrange themselves when you have been patient enough to let them. Patricia Okonkwo filed the preservation designation paperwork the following Monday. The legal process was not complicated. The building already met 3 of the 5 criteria for heritage protection without any additional documentation, but Patricia was thorough, as she always was, and she wanted every element in order before anything became public. She called Margaret on Wednesday afternoon to confirm that the designation had been accepted by the relevant authority and was now a matter of public record. How public? Margaret asked. It will appear in the planning register within the week, Patricia said. Anyone doing a title search or a property investigation will find it immediately. Margaret thanked her and hung up. She went back to the counter. She had a customer, a young woman she had not seen before, early 20s, who had been standing in the fiction aisle for 20 minutes with the focused uncertainty of someone who wants help but hasn't yet decided to ask for it. Margaret had learned over years that the right moment to offer assistance in this situation was not too soon and not too late, and that the moment announced itself if you were paying attention. She went to the fiction aisle. Is it for yourself or as a gift? The young woman looked up with relief. For my mother. She's in hospital. She reads everything, but I don't know, I want it to be right. They spent 15 minutes together. Margaret asked questions, not about the mother's reading preferences, but about who she was, what she found funny, whether she liked to feel hopeful at the end of a story or whether she found consolation in something more complicated. The young woman answered all of it, initially hesitant and then with increasing confidence, as people do when they realize they are being asked to talk about someone they love. Margaret found 3 books. The young woman chose 2 of them. At the counter she said, suddenly, "Do you work here?" "I own it," Margaret said. "Oh." The young woman looked around the shop again, as though recalibrating. "You must love it." "I do," Margaret said. After she left, the shop was quiet for a while. Margaret returned to the estate collection, which she had been working through for 2 weeks now and which had yielded, that morning, a first edition she had not expected and would need to have properly assessed. She set it carefully aside and went on with the rest. Daniel called on Friday evening. She had been expecting the call, though not necessarily on Friday. He had a particular pattern when something was building in him. He waited until the weekend was close, when the work week had ended and the weekend had not yet begun, the brief gap in which he was most likely to say what he actually meant rather than what he had rehearsed. "Mom," he said. "I had a conversation with Garrett today." She waited. He was doing some due diligence on the property. For his own records, he does this with any deal that doesn't go through, he tracks the market movement. A pause. He found the preservation designation. The planning register. She had expected this, if not quite so quickly. Yes, she said. The designation is, Mom, that's a Category A heritage listing. That's the same protection level as, he stopped himself. Started again. When did this happen? The designation was formally registered this week, she said. I signed the foundation agreement last Thursday. Silence. You knew, he said. Not accusatory. Not yet. Simply registering the shape of what he was understanding. When I came in. When we talked in the shop. You already knew. I had known for some time, she said. I was waiting until I had made my decision and the documentation was in order before speaking about it. I prefer to present completed things rather than possibilities. Another silence, longer. She let it be. The building can't be sold now, he said. Or developed. Or. No, she said. It cannot. Not under any circumstances the law currently provides for, and Patricia tells me the legal process required to challenge it would take a minimum of 4 years and would almost certainly fail. She heard him exhale, a long, slow breath that contained something she could not quite name. Not anger. Not grief. Something more complex, something that would need time to resolve itself into a single emotion. I want you to understand something, she said. I am not telling you this as a punishment or as a victory. I am telling you as a fact about the world, so that you can organize your thinking around it and stop spending energy on something that is finished. She paused. The shop was never going to be what you needed it to be. It was always going to be what it is. I think, if you are honest with yourself, you knew this. The numbers never made sense for what you had in mind. Garrett thought. Garrett, Margaret said, gently but clearly, was working for Garrett. A long pause. What happens now, he said. With the, you said you'd help me. With the debt. I meant it, she said. But I want you to come to the shop. Not with a laptop and not with a plan. Just come in and sit with me. Bring Lily if she'll come. And we'll talk about it properly, what it is, what a realistic path forward looks like, and what I am willing to do and on what terms. What terms? There was a guarded quality to the question. Nothing punitive, she said. But I have spent a great deal of time lending money without conditions, and I have learned that the money does not help when there are no conditions. So there will be conditions. Not cruel ones. Just honest ones. He was quiet again. Then, okay. Good, she said. Come Saturday. Lily's usually in by noon. She did not sleep badly that night, which she had half expected. She slept as she usually did, soundly, in the particular way of people who have been carrying something heavy and have finally set it down. In the morning she opened the shop at 9. The light was better than it had been all week, a clear March morning with the sun actually appearing after 3 days of gray, and it came through the south window with a particular warmth that made the whole of the fiction section glow. She stood in the middle of the shop for a moment and looked at it, the shelves, the reading corner, the display by the door she had changed 2 days ago to a collection of books about gardens, in anticipation of spring. She thought about Thomas saying, "Here you go." She thought about the professor's 3,000 books arriving in their boxes, all those lives between the covers, all those margin notes and pressed flowers and letters left inside, all the evidence of people who had read and felt and understood and wanted to say so. She thought about the young woman choosing books for her mother in the hospital. She thought about Lily, systematically working her way through the poetry section and telling no one. She went to make the morning tea. Constance Hale called at 10 to confirm that the first fellowship residency had been arranged, a novelist, mid-career, whose previous 2 books had been critically admired and commercially overlooked, who would come in May for 3 weeks to write and to be present for readings and conversations. The foundation would handle the announcement and the publicity. Margaret would handle the space and the welcome. She reads the way you stock shelves, Constance said. Which is to say, with precision and with love. I look forward to meeting her, Margaret said. There's one other thing, Constance said. We have a small ceremony, nothing elaborate, for shops receiving the designation. It's an informal gathering, usually an evening, the local community invited. We'd like to do it in May as well, around the time of the residency. Would that suit you? Margaret thought about the shop's 25th anniversary, and Lily asking whether anyone was planning a celebration. She thought about the fact that no one had been. That would suit me very well, she said. After the call she found a notepad and wrote, Lily, ask about May's ceremony. She put the notepad on the corner of the counter, where she would see it when Lily came in on Tuesday. Saturday arrived with the considered reliability of Saturdays. Lily came at noon, exactly as usual, with her coat still buttoned and her bag over one shoulder and the surveying look she always brought to the first moment in the room. Margaret was behind the counter. She had been there since 9 and had already, in the hours before the shop opened, made her decision about the first edition from the professor's collection. It was genuine, and it would go to auction, and the proceeds would go into the building maintenance fund that the foundation had established. She had also decided, in the same quiet hours, that she would tell Daniel about the endowment figure today. Not to make a point. Simply because he deserved to know what the shop had been, all along, without anyone trumpeting it. Dad's coming, Lily said, setting down her bag. He texted last night. He sounded different. Different how? Lily thought about it. Less like he was trying to fix something. More like he was just coming. Margaret nodded. Good, she said. Would you start on the new arrivals? I've put the ones I'd like shelved in the back. Lily went. The shop filled in its usual Saturday rhythm, the family with the small boy who always gravitated to the illustrated natural history books, the regular who came every Saturday morning and read 2 chapters of whatever was on the new fiction table before deciding whether to buy it, the couple who always chose one book each and then swapped before they reached the door, a game they had played for as long as Margaret had known them. Daniel arrived at 12:30. He came through the door and the bell rang in its usual way, and he stood for a moment just inside the entrance, which he had not done before. He had always walked straight in, with purpose, the way people walk into places they are planning to redevelop. He was wearing a sweater instead of a blazer. He looked at the room. Not calculating. Just looking. Margaret watched him from the counter. She watched him read the new display by the door, the garden books, the spring planting guides tucked beside novels about the seasons, a small selection of poetry about the natural world. She watched him look at the fiction section, the long comfortable aisle with its carefully organized shelves, the small review cards she wrote by hand and placed beside certain titles when she wanted to say, "This one is worth your time." He came to the counter. "Hi, Mom." "Hello," she said. "Lily's in the back." He went to find his daughter. Margaret heard the murmur of their voices, the particular warmth of the two of them together, which was one of the things she loved best about both of them, their ease with each other in a way that neither of them quite managed with the adults around them. She served 3 customers. She recommended a collection of essays to the man who always read 2 chapters of the new fiction before deciding, because she had watched him for 6 months and concluded that he was actually an essay reader who hadn't discovered it yet. He bought it without hesitation and looked, as he left, like someone given something they didn't know they'd been waiting for. This happened sometimes. It was one of the reasons she was still here after 28 years. At 1 o'clock she put the back in 20 minutes sign on the door and led Daniel and Lily to the reading corner. She brought tea without asking whether anyone wanted it, because both of them did and she knew it. "I want to tell you what the building is worth," she said, when they were settled. She meant it directly, the endowment figure, the preservation value, the auction estimate for the first edition, the assessed value of the estate collection. She had written it on a piece of paper, which she passed to Daniel. He read it. He passed it to Lily without speaking. Lily read it. She looked up at her grandmother. "Gran." "Yes," Margaret said. "This is," Lily looked at the paper again. "This is a lot." "It is," Margaret agreed. "It is the result of 28 years of careful work, of a building paid off over 2 decades, of a foundation that shows this shop above a great many others because of what it has built in this community. It is not modest." She looked at her son. It is the opposite of modest. Daniel was looking at the paper. His expression was, she searched for the word and found it, recalibrating. The way someone's face looks when the map they have been using turns out to have been wrong, and they are working out where they actually are. I didn't know, he said. I know you didn't, she said. I want to be clear, I didn't conceal it as a strategy. I simply didn't discuss money with you in detail because you had not asked in detail, and because the shop's finances were not your concern. They were mine. She paused. I want them to remain mine. The shop is mine, and its future is mine, and the decision I have made about its future is permanent. I need you to understand that completely, and to be at peace with it, before we talk about anything else. He looked at her steadily. I understand it, he said. And he stopped. Tried again. I'm sorry I didn't see it. The shop. What it actually was. What did you think it was? She asked. Not unkindly. Genuinely. He thought about it. Something smaller than it is, he said finally. I thought you were being sentimental. Holding on to something because Dad loved it. I didn't think it was, he gestured, not quite finding the word, at the room around them. What it is, Lily said quietly, from the third chair. He looked at his daughter. Yeah, he said. What it is. Margaret picked up her tea. She gave the moment the silence it deserved. Then she said, now. Tell me about the debt. All of it. Not the version you tell people, but the actual version. He told her. It took 20 minutes and was not comfortable for either of them, which meant it was honest. She asked questions. She did not soften the questions, but she asked them without judgment, and by the time he was finished she had a clear picture of the situation and had already, in the part of her mind that ran alongside conversations, begun to map the shape of what could help. Here is what I will do, she said. I will lend you a specific amount, we will agree it together, and it will be less than you think you need and more than you think I have. The conditions are, you see a financial advisor, not Garrett, someone independent, before the money moves. You bring me quarterly updates for 2 years. And you use one Saturday a month, for as long as the debt is outstanding, to come into this shop and do something useful. I don't care what. Shelf books. Fix the shelves that need fixing. Help with events. I will find you something. Because I believe that people who are given things without any connection to their cost do not learn the right things. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. That's very specific. I am a very specific person, Margaret said. The Saturday thing. He glanced at Lily, who was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. That's not just about the money. No, Margaret agreed. It is not just about the money. He was quiet. He looked around the reading corner, the 2 armchairs, the small table between them, the shelves close on all sides, the south window where the light was doing its 3 o'clock thing, going gold across everything it touched. He looked at it all as though he was seeing it for the first time, because in the way that mattered, he was. Okay, he said. The Saturday thing. Okay. Lily made a small sound, not quite a laugh, something softer, and reached over and put her hand on her father's arm for a moment, and then withdrew it. Margaret rose to take the cups back to the small kitchen area at the back. Over her shoulder she said, Lily. Tell your father about the May ceremony. She heard Lily begin to explain the foundation, the fellowship, the evening gathering, the community invited, the celebration she had thought to ask about on the anniversary that no one else had thought to mark. She heard Daniel listening. She heard him ask a question, and she heard his daughter answer it. She washed the cups. She dried them and put them away. She looked out the small window at the courtyard where the wisteria was making its first green moves towards spring. Thomas had planted that wisteria in the second summer after they opened. He had chosen it because it was long-lived. Wisteria, he had told her, could outlast almost anything. A mature wisteria could be 100 years old and still flowering. He had planted it as a joke about his own prognosis and as a promise about hers. She touched the windowsill. Looked at the plant. "Here you go," she said quietly, to no one in particular. The May ceremony was a Thursday evening, the right day, as far as Margaret was concerned. Constance Hale came down from London. Patricia Okonkwo came, in a dress that Margaret had never seen on her before and that suited her enormously. The local primary school sent its head teacher and the librarian who ran the Saturday morning program. The clinical director of the hospice came with 2 of the staff members she had written about in her nomination letter. The community mental health organization sent 3 people, one of whom Margaret recognized as someone she had quietly welcomed to the shop for years without ever discussing why he came or what he was carrying when he walked through the door. The novelist arrived the week before and had already, by the Thursday, made herself at home in a way that felt immediate and right. She sat in the reading corner for 2 or 3 hours each morning and wrote, and then in the afternoons she browsed and occasionally, with a tentativeness that Margaret found endearing in someone of her reputation, asked whether she could recommend something. Margaret always could. The evening itself was simple. Wine. The reading corner rearranged with additional chairs borrowed from the church hall 2 streets over. Brief speeches. Constance spoke about the foundation and what it looked for, the head teacher spoke about the Saturday program, the novelist read a short passage she had written that morning, which was not about bookshops but which everyone in the room understood was, at its core, about exactly this kind of place. And then Margaret spoke. She had not prepared remarks, which was unusual for her. She was ordinarily a preparer, a woman who thought through what she meant to say before she said it. But she had decided, some days before, that this was a moment for something unscheduled. She stood in the middle of the shop, not behind the counter, not at the front, but in the center, where all directions of the room were equally available to her, and she looked at the people gathered there and she said, "My husband Thomas stood in this doorway 28 years ago and watched me unlock it for the first time. He said 3 words, 'Here you go.' I have been going ever since." She paused. A bookshop is not a warehouse for objects. It is a place where people come to find something they didn't know they needed until they stood in front of it. I have spent 28 years learning how to help people find that thing. I am not finished learning. She looked around the room, at Constance, at Patricia, at the head teacher, at the staff from the hospice, at the novelist sitting in the reading corner armchair, at all of them. "Thank you for being part of what this is. It is, more than I can say." Which, for someone in the book business, is saying something. There was laughter, and then the particular warmth that comes after laughter when it has been real. Lily, who had been standing near the poetry section, caught her grandmother's eye across the room. She lifted her glass, water, because she was 16, though Margaret had the quiet suspicion there was something in it that hadn't been there when she poured it, and gave a small, private nod. Margaret gave one back. Daniel came the first Saturday of June. He arrived at 10, before the shop was open, and knocked on the glass door like a customer who wasn't sure of his welcome, and Margaret unlocked it and let him in. She put him to work on the shelving project she had been deferring for 3 months. The non-fiction section needed a full reorganization, the categories having drifted over the years into a comfortable but imprecise arrangement that she had been meaning to correct since autumn. She showed him the system she wanted and then left him to it, because she had learned over a long career that the most useful thing you can do for someone doing unfamiliar work is trust them with it. He was slower than she would have been. He was also more careful than she had expected, stopping to read descriptions, occasionally coming to ask her a question: does this go with the history section or the politics section? What counts as philosophy when it's also memoir? The questions were good questions. She answered them honestly and without condescension. At noon Lily appeared, as she always did. She stopped in the doorway of the non-fiction section and looked at her father kneeling on the floor with a stack of books and the expression of someone deeply engaged in a classification problem. "Hi, Dad." "Hey." He held up a book. "Is this history or current affairs?" "It's about events that happened 10 years ago." Lily considered it. "History," she said. 10 years is long enough." He put it in the history pile. Lily came to help, and for the next 2 hours they worked side by side while Margaret ran the counter, and she could hear the murmur of their conversation, quiet, practical, occasionally punctuated by Lily's laugh, which was a sound Margaret had always loved because it was unguarded in a way the rest of her was not. At 2 o'clock she made them all sandwiches in the small back kitchen. They ate in the reading corner, she in her usual chair, Daniel in the other, Lily on the footstool she had claimed for herself years ago with the sovereign authority of the young. "It looks better," Daniel said, about the non-fiction section. "It does," Margaret agreed. It did. The clarity he had brought to it, the careful placement, the precision he had applied once he understood the logic, had improved it beyond what she had expected. "I might come back," he said, in the tone of someone trying to make something sound casual that was not casual at all. "To finish it. There's still the biography section." "There is," Margaret agreed. "Unless you'd rather." "You can finish it," she said. "I'd like you to." He nodded. He looked at his sandwich. He looked at the room. He said, not to her, not to Lily, almost to himself, "I can't believe I never just sat in here." "You had other things on your mind," Margaret said.
"Yeah."
He was quiet. "Not anymore, though." "Not, I mean, the debt is still," he stopped. Began again. "I have a meeting with the financial advisor next week. The one you recommended." "Good," she said. "It's going to take a while." "Most things worth doing take a while," she said. "That's not a bad thing." He looked at her. For a moment, just a moment, she saw in his face something she had not seen in years. Not the bright eagerness of a man with a pitch deck, not the careful warmth of someone managing her expectations. Something quieter than both of those things. Something that was simply her son, sitting in his mother's shop on a Saturday afternoon, without an agenda and without a plan, trying to find his footing in a world he had been moving through too fast to see clearly. She thought about Thomas. About the way certain kinds of love are not dramatic but are the more real for that, not the love that announces itself, but the love that simply stays, that returns, that persists through the years and the changes and the losses and the misunderstandings. That is still there on a Saturday in June when the light comes through the south window and turns gold at 3 o'clock. "Lily," she said. "Tell your father about the autumn program." Lily set down her sandwich and began to explain, the reading series, the school partnership, the evening of poetry she was helping Margaret organize for October, the poet who was coming from Edinburgh. She had been helping plan it for 2 weeks. She spoke about it with the particular animation of someone involved in something that matters to them. Daniel listened to his daughter talk. Margaret watched him listen. She saw the moment, she was good at seeing moments, when something shifted in him, when he stopped listening with the part of him that was always already thinking about the next thing, and started listening with the part of him that was simply here. It was a small moment. Quiet and unannounced. But it was real. The biography section was finished 3 Saturdays later. Daniel came both times, and on the second Saturday he also fixed 2 shelving brackets that had been loose for longer than Margaret was willing to admit, and he rewired the lamp in the reading corner that had been flickering intermittently since February. He was good with his hands. She had forgotten that about him. He had been good with them as a boy, building things in the garden with Thomas. She did not mention this. But she noticed it. Lily noticed everything, as she always had. On the 4th Saturday, she appeared with a small notebook, the kind with a hard cover and proper paper, the kind you buy when you intend to use it seriously, and announced, to no one in particular, that she had started writing something. "What kind of something?" Daniel asked. "I don't know yet," she said. "It might be nothing. But Gran said you don't know until you try." Daniel looked at Margaret, who had said this more than once over the course of the last several weeks in various forms, to various people, about various things. "She's right," he said. "I know," Lily said, without any particular self-satisfaction. She went to the poetry section with her notebook and her pen, and she sat in the armchair by the south window, and the afternoon light came through and turned everything gold the way it always did at 3 o'clock. Margaret stood at the counter. The shop was quiet in the way she loved, not empty, but settled. A man she recognized from the Tuesday poetry readings was browsing the shelves near the back. A woman she didn't know was standing in front of the new arrivals with the open, unguarded look of someone who has just discovered somewhere they are going to come back to. Daniel appeared beside her at the counter. He leaned against it, not behind it, just beside her, in the way someone stands when they are present but not claiming anything. They stood there for a moment in the quiet of the shop, watching the room. "Thank you," he said. He said it simply, without embellishment. "For what specifically?" she said. She needed him to know what he was thanking her for. He thought about it. "For not letting it go," he said. "And for showing me what it was. What it actually was, instead of what I thought." She looked at the room, the shelves and the light and the people in it, the living and the dead, Thomas and the professor whose books lined the back shelves now, all the margin notes and the pressed flowers and the names on the dedication pages of the estate collection she was still working through, the whole accumulated weight of all the lives that had passed through this door or come to rest in the pages on these walls. "Your grandfather said something when we opened," she said. 3 words. "Here you go." I've thought about those words a great deal over the years. I used to think he meant, "Here is your new adventure." But I think what he meant was simpler than that. Here you go. Here is where you go. This is the place. Daniel was quiet. "This is the place," she said again. "For me. It has always been the place." And now, she looked at her granddaughter in the armchair, writing in her notebook with the afternoon light on her hair, and at her son standing beside her at the counter, and at the room around all of them. "Now it belongs to more than just me." The bell above the door rang, clear and slightly imperfect, the sound between sharp and sweet. A new customer came in. She stood just inside the door and looked at the room, the way people look at rooms that tell them immediately that they are somewhere worth being. Margaret moved from behind the counter to help her. Here she went. "Thank you for staying all the way to the end. The people who finish the whole story are the ones who understand it, and the ones who share it. If this one moved you, the next video on your screen is waiting to do the same. And if you haven't subscribed yet, come back. There's always another woman the world underestimated. And we tell those stories here.